Yo, 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 what's going on? Welcome back to the Bring the Sync podcast. I'm your host, Justin Hamroun, and we got a good one. This is the first episode after the conclusion of the 2025-2026 NFL season, and let's get right into it. First and foremost, I want to apologize if I sound a little different. I am in a different place using slightly different equipment, so I don't know if this is going to help or hinder my recording quality. So I guess we'll see. I can't necessarily listen to myself as I'm speaking right now, so I guess I'm just as clueless as you guys are right now. So here we go. What we are doing is we are going week by week and mentioning all the best games from week 1, week 2, week 3, and so on for the entire season. The best, the most watched, the most prolific, just some of the best games from each week. Some weeks we'll have maybe one or two. Other weeks we might have like 3 or 4 of the best games. And I do not believe that I'm going to go over the entire season just in the span of this one episode. This is episode 13, so we might finish on episode 14 or even episode 15. We're going to try to get through at least weeks 1 through 6 right now. So let's get into it. Without a further ado, here we go. So right off the bat, week 1, we're going to time travel all the way back to September. Right off of the bat, we had some great games to open up the season. We had the Cowboys versus the Eagles that ended 24-20, which I believe all the scoring halted by the third quarter because it was looking like it was going to be like 42-38 at some point. But all the scoring halted, and it was not as good of a game as we thought it was going to be, but it was still, we were just all grateful to have meaningful football back. The next day on Friday in Brazil, Brasilia, Sao Paulo, we had the Chiefs going up against the Chargers, and the Chargers made their mark. The healthy Chargers, they really stamped the Chiefs with that statement win, 27-21. Everybody was on the edge of their seats because this was still that Chiefs team that just had lost the Super Bowl 8 months prior, 6 months prior, or whatever it was. So at this point in time, we had no idea that the Chiefs were a lot weaker of a version of the Kansas City Chiefs. But, when the Chargers beat them in international grounds, it definitely set the tone for the rest of the season. So I had to mention that one. But obviously, I cannot mention week number 1 without the final game of the season, or without the final game of the weekend. That Sunday night, Bills versus Ravens. My goodness. This one was a heater. This one was a rocket. The Bills were down in the fourth quarter late, 40-25, and came back and scored 16 unanswered points with a Matt Prater game-winning field goal on Sunday Night Football with Mike Tirico making the call. Bills over the Ravens. The Ravens could not exact their revenge over their loss the previous year in the playoffs. Golly, this was a beautiful game. This was one of the best games I've watched pretty much all season long. And we might actually have to get into the best games of the season after mentioning, all of the best games of each week at the end of this little mission that we got going on. And then obviously on that Monday night, we had the Vikings going up against the Bears, where J.J. McCarthy was playing like booty cheeks for about 3.5 quarters, and then turned it up at the last quarter and, put on his Tim Tebow face. And, they ended up, they ended up beating the Bears in Chicago 27-24. That was a pretty crazy game, but I think after watching the Ravens and Bills, I just thought that there was nothing that week, even on Monday, that was going to top that. So that has to be like my number 1 overall pick for the week 1 season. That's an easy choice for me. Now moving on to week 2. Week 2, we had the Bears going up against the Lions. No, that was not a good game. I'm looking at the wrong one. We have the Giants going up against the Cowboys, and this is the game where Russell Wilson unlocked his past self, threw for 475 yards, over 4 touchdowns. 3 touchdowns, 450 yards. We had a little tiny breakout from Cam Scatterbo, 45 yards. Remember Cam Scatterbo? Remember when that was the thing? Remember when he was just pounding guys, dude? That was an awesome team to watch. That was when Malik Neighbors had 9 receptions for 167 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, golly, this was a good game, and this was a great showing by the New York Giants after losing to the Commanders the previous week in an ultimately pathetic showdown. I think that the final score of that game was 28-6. So, coming out and punching Dallas in the mouth, this is when we kind of realized that Dallas had a really weak defense, but they had a phenomenal offense because Dallas came right back and scored 40 freaking points, sent it into overtime. I think, we're just into week 2, but I think this was definitely probably the best game of week 2. Let me look over the rest of these. We also had the Patriots beating the Dolphins back when we didn't know what to expect from the Patriots. They beat them 33-27. There was 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns in that game, or at least special teams returns for touchdowns in that game. The Dolphins took the lead late with I believe it was a punt return, and then on the ensuing kick return, that's when the Patriots retook the lead and ended up beating the Dolphins in Miami 33-27. That game was electric. I remember that game on Red Zone perfectly. Like, that was an awesome game. That was when we didn't really know what to expect from the Patriots, but man, like they put themselves on the map, especially considering the fact that they won 4 games the previous year. It was like, wow, we already won a quarter of our games 2 weeks into the season. Like, let's go. And obviously, like, they lost to the Patriots the previous week, so we thought it was going to be like the same old Patriots from the last 4 or 5 years or whatever. But yeah, that was a pretty sweet game to watch. And speaking of the AFC East, I completely forgot to mention that in the previous week, week 1, there was a phenomenal Steelers-Jets game. That was Aaron Rodgers' homecoming to New York, in which the Steelers won 34-32. So I just had to interject that there. That was a great game, too. That started off the 11 a.m. slot Mountain Time for the Sunday games, and oh my god, that was an awesome game. That I really thought that the Jets were going to be something this year after watching that game, but it was just a total knee-jerk reaction. The Jets ended up being one of the worst teams in the NFL. So, but I had to interject that one real quick because I completely forgot to talk about that one. Now, as for week 2, the rest of week 2, I should say, we had that Broncos-Colts game that ended in a kind of referee disaster when they called that leverage penalty that hasn't been called in, I want to say, 15 plus years, and the Colts ended up beating the Broncos 29-28, and the Colts kind of put their mark on the season after crushing the Dolphins the previous week and then beating a formidable opponent with the Broncos. And we didn't really realize how formidable the Broncos were because they ended up winning 14 out of the next 17 games. So that was a great win by the Colts. We definitely thought it was gonna be something, but obviously with those injuries in the second half of the season, that definitely made that team totally collapse, and which was quite unfortunate because that Colts team was a lot of fun to watch. There was also that Eagles-Chiefs game in which the Eagles pushed the Chiefs to 0-2 and everybody was in panic. Actually, nobody was in panic, which was funny. They were just like, oh, the Chiefs are going to turn it around. The Chiefs are going to go on a run, and I think everybody was in denial that the Chiefs were actually a weakened version of the, lo and behold, Kansas City Chiefs that we were all accustomed to seeing since, 2018. And then fast forwarding to that Monday, there was a double header. It was Buccaneers Texans and Chargers Raiders. Now, I'm not going to discuss the Chargers Raiders beyond this point, but the Buccaneers and Texans, back when Baker was healthy and he was playing like an MVP candidate, he got the ball back down by 5 with like a little over a minute left. I believe it was a minute 30, and he drove down the field and scored a touchdown from the 1-yard line to take the lead. Obviously, they didn't get the 2-point conversion, but they ended up beating the Texans and also pushed them to 0-2, and everybody in Houston was kind of panicking at that point, like, what's going on with the Texans? Are they going to make the playoffs, or is this the same Texans team? What's going on with CJ Stroud? The defense is phenomenal, but this offense can't score points, and especially for a primetime game, this was awesome to watch. This game gave me butterflies to watch. It's like I usually only get those butterflies when I'm watching my own team, but when I was watching Baker and the Bucks, driving down the field, Mr. Clutch, that was what more could I say about this game? It had it all. It had trash talking. It had good defense. It had good offense at times. Like, it had the stars out. And this is the point where I thought Emeka Egbuka was actually going to be something special, which he could still very well be, but I remember I was getting all sorts of trades for him in my fantasy leagues, and I was like, nope, nope. He scored 23 last week and 25 this week. I'm not trading him away. There's no way. And after about week 5 or 6, that just ended up being a totally disastrous move. So I just had to mention that. Thank you, Emeka Ibuka. I single-handedly lost multiple fantasy leagues because of you. Still salty about it if you can't tell. Moving on to week 3, just have to give the honorable mention to the Cleveland Browns beating the Packers in Cleveland 13-10. This was fresh off of the trade for Micah Parsons, and they just beat 2 formidable opponents in the Lions and the Commanders, and now the Packers roll into Cleveland, I believe, as like 10-point favorites or 13-point favorites or whatever, and they end up losing to Joe Flacco and the Cleveland Browns. Like, I just had to mention this because this was such a crazy upset. It's like, okay, we finally got one of those upsets that just doesn't make any sense. Little did we know that Raiders upset over the Patriots was also one of those that didn't make any sense now that we're looking back at it. But this one was like, for sure, especially to especially to give the Packers their first loss of the season after going 2-0. Like, that was crazy. I just couldn't believe that had happened. But like they say, any given Sunday, so that's why they don't play the games on paper. So that was definitely a great upset to watch, especially in the early slate of the games. Now, moving on, we had the Steelers beating the Patriots 21-14 to give the Patriots their second of 3 total losses in a season. They started out 1-2 and they ended out 14-3. That was they ended on quite a run. That was one hell of a run by the Patriots. I got to give them credit. Now, how can we talk about week 3 without mentioning the Rams going up against the Eagles, in which the Rams had an early lead and made the Eagles look like they were human, that they were mortal, and they lined up for a game-winning kick. They were down 27-26, and all of a sudden, they kick the field goal and it gets blocked, and then returned for a touchdown by Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis, there was so many people mad at him in the social media sphere because they ruined the point spread, or they were happy for him because he cashed out their point spread for that victory. And I'm not one to promote gambling. I hate gambling. I think it's a cancer, but I just thought that was hilarious that people wanted him to go down at that point. Like, man, he's a defensive lineman and he has an opportunity to score a touchdown with no time remaining. Like, I'm scoring that 100 times out of 100. So that was quite an awesome game. And another awesome game that also involved a kicker or a blocked kick for a touchdown was the Jets against the Buccaneers in Tampa, in which we got that amazing clip from Aaron Glenn where he was dancing on the sidelines after they had returned that special team score, only to find that Baker Mayfield was still waiting on the other end, waiting to exact his revenge yet again, this time against Steve Wilks, that defensive coordinator, and he ended up leading the Bucs down the field to score and ultimately win the game 29-27. Honestly, definitely one of the best games of the year. This is definitely probably my solid number 1 pick of the week 3 slate. Obviously, we had that Broncos-Chargers game in which Bo Nix missed a couple of throws here and there, but they still had ample opportunities to win the game. And then Justin Herbert made some superhuman throws, as he usually does, specifically against the Broncos. He doesn't do it against anybody else, but except the Broncos. He's just a Broncos killer. And they ultimately won the game off of a game-winning field goal for the Broncos to go to 1-2 and lose back-to-back weeks on game-ending field goals. Which is funny because both the 14-3 teams in the AFC both started out 1-2. So both of them went on a hell of a run, going 13-1 over their last 14 games. That's quite impressive for both the Patriots and the Broncos. So hell of a season from both teams. If you want to learn more about that, you can listen to episode 1 of Bring the Sink, where I give the end-of-the-year grades for all of them. So I had to give you guys a little shameless plug if you haven't listened to the end-of-the-year grades. Last but not least, on week 3, they had the Lions going up against the Ravens in Baltimore, in which the Ravens were pushed to 1-2, and the Lions finally took back control of their season after dropping the first game of the season against the Packers, and they ended up beating beating them 38-30, and this is when the Lions were just clicking on all cylinders. Back when they were actually going for it on fourth down and actually converting on fourth down, I should say. And boy, this was an awesome game to watch. We definitely deserved a good Monday night game after getting a doubleheader the previous week, and boy, did we get it. This was quite an awesome game to watch, and I think a lot of people picked the Ravens to win this game. So anytime an underdog team that's also a good team wins, it's like that's a statement victory. That team gets put on the map after that. And they were already on the map, but after losing by multiple possessions to the Packers in week 1, there were a lot of questions looming about the Lions, which were definitely justified seeing as how the rest of the season went. This was a good win for the Lions. Week 4, it started out with a banger. We had the eventual Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks going into Arizona and playing against the Arizona Cardinals, and the Arizona Cardinals were making some plays in this game, man. They really put up a fight. You can never underestimate these divisional opponents, man. And they put up a hell of a fight against the Seattle Seahawks, but the Seattle Seahawks, after getting a phenomenal return with a few seconds left in the game, they ended up ultimately winning this one 23-20. And the reason why I remember this game so clearly is because this was actually one of the only games that I didn't watch. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, "Oh, Justin, what do you mean you didn't watch this game if you remember it so clearly?" It's because I actually had to go back and rewatch this game because I was at a concert with some of my friends. So when I went back and rewatched it, especially after seeing all the social media reactions and all the reactions of my boys in the group chat, obviously I was keeping track of the score and whatnot, and I was trying to pull up the live feed on my phone, but the service was just not good enough for me to do that. So when I actually went back in and watched this game, this was an awesome game, and I was kind of kicking myself for missing out on this game because how often do you get good banging Thursday night games? So this was definitely a great start to the week for week 4. We also had the Rams going up against the Colts back when the Colts looked pretty immortal, and going up against another immortal opponent in the Rams after barely losing to the Eagles the previous week off of a blocked field goal. The Colts really gave it to the Rams, and they were actually about to beat the Rams until A.D. Mitchell, off of a long touchdown catch and run. Well, actually, it was supposed to be a touchdown. He fumbled it at the 1 after he was trying to extend the ball across the goal line. And I don't know what he was trying to do, look cool or something, but he tried extending and he ultimately ended up fumbling it through the end zone and saving the Rams and probably ultimately winning the Rams this ball game. So that was definitely one of the best games of this week. I was going through this slate. There wasn't a whole lot of great games from this slate. We had the Falcons beating the Commanders 34-27. I'm not gonna lie, even though I've watched pretty much all these games, I don't really remember too much of that Falcons Commanders game. I in terms of the day spread and the afternoon spread, there was kind of a lot of blowouts. Obviously the Chargers and the Giants, that was a great game because the Giants ended up upsetting the Chargers and handing them their first loss of the season and winning 21-18, and that was Jackson Dart's first ever start, and that was Jackson Dart and Cam Scatabo both, swagging it out there. The creatine guys, they were rumbling, bumbling, stumbling, probably a little too hard because they eventually ended up getting both injured a few weeks later, but there was a lot of reason for optimism in New York after seeing these guys play. There was also the Eagles and Bucks game in Tampa Bay. And the score actually makes it look a lot closer than it was because the Bucks were down by multiple possessions, and then they cut it kind of close to one possession. The Eagles ended up winning 31-25. So it was exciting at some points, but this was not totally the greatest game, especially since the Bucks didn't complete that comeback. If they did, it would have been a different story, but for right now, that's all she wrote. Now, as I continue to scroll, I realized that I had left out a couple of games that were some of the best games of the season, in my opinion. Number 1, the Bears beating the Raiders off of a game-winning field goal, 25-24 in Las Vegas. This was Ashton Genty's breakout game, but this was kind of the start of that cardiac Bears movement when they just won a bunch of games in the last 2 minutes of the game and really kind of put them on the map, even though Las Vegas was one of, if not the worst team in the league. This was still an awesome game to watch and one of the only good games of the afternoon slate. Now, in terms of Sunday Night Football, this Sunday Night Football game in Week 4 was probably one of, if not the best game, and is a number 1 seed contender, maybe a number 2 seed contender for best game of the season, with the Green Bay Packers going into Arlington, Texas to play against the Dallas Cowboys in a game that ultimately was a shootout with no defense or defense just totally optional. And the Packers and the Cowboys neither won nor lost because they both tied 40-40 at the end of regulation, at the end of overtime, I should say. Golly, I remember I was talking to my lady on the phone while watching this game, and I just felt like the highest paid commentator in the world, because literally every other play I was like, oh, and George Pickens makes one hell of a catch and he drives it down the field. It was just, I was losing my mind watching this game. I ended up keeping my lady on the phone for like 2 hours because I got lost. I was watching this game and I was just totally mesmerized. Like, this was totally one of the best, if not the best game of the season. The only knack or knock that I have on this game specifically is the fact that it ended in a tie. I do not like ties. I am not a fan of ties. I would much rather a game end in a win or a loss. Don't give me a half a slice of bread. Either give me the full bread or don't give me any bread at all. You know what I mean? So I don't know. If I had a dog in this race, maybe I would have been fine or okay with the tie. But when I don't have dogs in the race, give me a clear-cut winner and give me a clear-cut loser. So that's the only knock I really have about this game. It kind of ended in anticlimactic fashion, but other than that, this game was totally and utterly perfect from an offensive standpoint. Moving on to Week 5, we're almost there, guys. We're almost done. Just hang in there. So we have the start of the week. We had a Thursday night football game, and I remember this game because I was filling out a job application, and this was a tedious job application. I was filling out like 16 different steps. I'm not going to get into any specifics, but I filled out like 16 pages worth of information as I was watching this game, and this game was trying its hardest to distract me from the task at hand because the 49ers were going up against the Rams in SoFi, and the 49ers ultimately ended up beating the Rams for one of the Rams' only losses of the season, or I guess one of 5 losses on the season, after Kyren Williams late in the game had fumbled at the 1-yard line. This was crazy to me. The fact that the Rams' only couple losses to this point was the fact that Kyren Williams fumbled at the 1-yard line and the fact that they had a game-winning field goal lined up, ready to go, and they got it blocked and returned for a touchdown. Like, those were the only 2 games that they had lost at this point. I was really thinking the Rams were my clear-cut Super Bowl contender from the NFC, but I guess the Seattle Seahawks had something to say about that. Moving on to Sunday, they had the Dolphins going up against the Panthers in Carolina, and the Panthers were starting to stack up some victories at home. This was their second victory at home. They were 2-3 on the season, but it looked like something was going on. There was something building over there because they still had 2 wins on the season through 5 games, in which they probably only had 2 wins through 10 or 11 games the previous year. So Dave Canales, you could see that there was something brewing over there in Carolina, and he had those boys playing. This was the game where they had the local Charlotte Hornets commentator broadcasting this game, and man, was he electric. This was such an awesome game to watch just because of that. It just sounded like every single play was just the ultimate Hail Mary, like 70-yard touchdown or something. Like, this game was so back and forth. If I remember correctly, here, let me check specifically. Yes, I do remember correctly. This was Rico Dowdle's breakout game when he had 200 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, and then another 3 receptions for 28 yards to add on to that. And I had him in fantasy too. So that was an easy victory for me in fantasy. And I thought that Rico Dowdle was going to take me to the promised land. Like, I thought, give this guy the rock 30 times, the Dolphins defense was good, like he's just going to be unstoppable this year. And, he had a great season. I will say Rico Dowdle did have a hell of a season, but this breakout game did not accurately depict how the rest of his season was going to go, especially since Chuba Hubbard was injured too. So when Chuba Hubbard came back, obviously Rico Dowdle was the main, horse in that backfield, but they were just splitting a lot less carries at that point, or he was just getting a lot less carries because they were splitting them at that point. So it was kind of unfortunate. I wanted to see how well Rico Dowdle could do for the rest of the season as the main workhorse. Scrolling through this slate, I realized week 5 was kind of legendary. We also had the Broncos going into the undefeated Philadelphia Eagles territory, the reigning Super Bowl champion Eagles, and handing them their first loss after being down 17-3 and coming back and beating them 21-17. I remember all of my Eagles fan friends were all super pissed, and they were feeling suicidal. It was not a good time for them, but I was on top of the world. I knew that the Broncos had arrived, especially after losing those 2 close games, week 2 and week 3. I knew we had it in us, man, and we came in and we punched those guys in the mouth, and we kind of derailed their season for a little bit because next week they ended up losing against the Giants bad by, I think it was like 34-17. Here, I'll find out here in a second, but man, that was pretty bad. So the fact that the Broncos were able to do that, it definitely silenced a lot of the haters, and that was something that I loved about this 2025 season in general. It definitely silenced a lot of haters. It took some time because, every single game was only won by like 1 possession or so, or like 2 points, 3 points, last drive of the game kind of thing. But at the end of the day, a win is a win is a win is a win. You know what I mean? So definitely, as a Broncos fan, one of the most memorable victories of the entire season. This was Sean Payton and Bo Nix's first overall statement win, I should say. And yeah, boy, we kept stacking more and more statement wins as the season went along. Now, the next game I have actually referred to a couple of more times. I think I referred to it in episode 1 of the pod. I referred to it back in episode 2 of the pod. I might have referred to it here in a most recent episode of the pod as well. This was the Titans going up against Arizona, in which the Titans finally got their first victory through no means of their own, because Amari DiMercato runs 80 yards and then fumbles through the end zone, and then Cam Ward drives down the field, throws a pick inside the 10-yard line, in which the intercepting player falls down, fumbles the football, it gets kicked. It literally gets kicked into the end zone and then recovered for a Titans score. I couldn't believe it. And this was another one of those games where there was just so many like bloopers, but it's like bloopers, they're not supposed to make it to like the actual stage. But this one, it was just a movie full of bloopers. It's like the bloopers were a part of a real script. This was the game where the center snapped the ball to Kyler Murray and it just hit him in the helmet and he got like disoriented for a few seconds. This game was just a total meme. Like, it was just a joke. So I definitely had to mention this just because I remember I almost turned this game off. It was 21-6. The Cardinals had complete control, and then slowly but surely, the Titans ended up coming back and ultimately winning this ball game. I could not believe my eyes. I was appalled, and I'm not even a Cardinals fan. It was crazy. We also had the Buccaneers beating the Seahawks in Seattle, and the Buccaneers, you guys have something to hold your hats on, because this is a game. Here's this stat. The Buccaneers are the only team to have beaten outright the Seahawks this year. The only team that has not lost to the Seahawks this year on the Seahawks schedule. The Seahawks have beaten every single team on their schedule this year up to the Super Bowl, except for the Buccaneers. And you're thinking, how is that possible? Because they lost to the Rams and they lost to the 49ers. Well, yeah, but they also beat the Rams and they also beat the 49ers. So the Buccaneers were the only team on their schedule that just beat the Seahawks outright They were that's just I guess congrats to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You guys are the 2025 Super Bowl champions. You guys can hoist a banner up now. We beat the Super Bowl champ. We were the only team to beat the Super Bowl champions this year outright. So, yeah, definitely had to mention that one. This game was a shootout. It was 38-35. Baker Mayfield did his thing in the fourth quarter again. He was looking like a solid MVP candidate before all those devastating injuries that entire team suffered. Now, moving on to Sunday Night Football. Here was the statement win for the Patriots as they went into Orchard Park in Buffalo and beat the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen 23-20 in one of the craziest upsets that I've seen. And there was a lot of Patriots fans that I follow and that I'm friends with, and they were all very, very confident that they were going to go into Buffalo and beat the Bills. And I was like, I don't know about that. The Bills are looking like Super Bowl contenders. They got Josh Allen. Drake May's still young, but man, was I wrong, because this was an awesome game. Drake May was making a hell of a throw after a hell of a throw. It's just this was the only good team that the Patriots had beaten all season long, and it came at one hell of a time. This, like I'm telling you guys, this Week 5 slate was awesome. Definitely one of my favorite weeks of the season, and definitely a contender for the best week of the season overall, just in terms of football, because we also had, in the following day, Monday Night Football, Joe Buck and Troy Aikman calling the Jaguars-Chiefs game. And if you guys remember it, because I remember it clear as day, Trevor Lawrence, at the end of the game, 30 seconds left, inside the 5-yard line, takes the drop back, takes the snap, falls down to the ground, almost falls again, gets back up, and rushes into the end zone for a touchdown to beat the Chiefs. And one of the first times that the Jaguars have beaten the Chiefs in their history, too, up until that point, which was kind of hilarious if you thought about it. But, and putting the Jaguars at 4-1, and ultimately the Jaguars ended up sweeping the rest of the AFC West, and they became AFC West champions for this year because they beat every single AFC West champion. I'm kind of repeating myself here. Forgive me, but after the Chiefs had started 0-2, and then they won their next 2 games to go back to 2-2, we all just thought it was over. We thought the Chiefs were just going to go back to the Super Bowl again, and you couldn't count them out anymore. And like I said, it was that Chiefs denial. We were all suffering with that Chiefs derangement syndrome. But no, the Jaguars pushed them back 1 game below 500 yet again, and Trevor Lawrence with an awesome showing. And I remember this game specifically because I had a huge argument with my friends in the group chat, because I was telling them that I would rather take Trevor Lawrence over Jalen Hurts, and a lot of my friends had a lot of problems with that, and they were arguing with me about that quite a bit. But when the Jags ended up pulling this one off, I felt like I was on top of the world. That one definitely clinched my argument, at least for the time being. Now, moving on to Week 6, this will be our last week of the episode, and next week we will go over Week 7 through either 12 or 13, and we'll see how it goes. Not next week, probably Monday or Tuesday, I should say. But yeah, so this will be the final week of the episode, and then or the final week that we're reviewing in this episode 13, and then when we're back for episode 14, we will go over Week 7 through 13. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my mind. I hope it makes sense for you guys. So, concluding with Week 6, we had the worst game that I had ever seen in my life, and this was the London game. So, sorry to all the UK guys. We had the Broncos playing against the Jets in probably the sloppiest, worst game that I had ever watched as a Broncos fan that ended up ultimately in a victory. So, like I said, it was a win is a win is a win, and the fact that we won, I remember waking up at 7:30 in the morning for this game, and I was just totally sick to my stomach the entire game. So the fact that we ended up pulling it off, it was like, okay, thank God that I didn't wake up for nothing. But I am so sorry, London, that you had to watch this game, especially against an 0-6 opponent. This was really the game where people thought the Broncos weren't really all that good, and they were kind of fluky just because they had beaten the Super Bowl champs the previous week, and now they're struggling against the New York Jets. And as we'll find out in the next episode, they also kind of struggled against the New York Giants. But that's for the next episode. episode. That's a little spoiler alert. That's a little sneak peek preview. We also had the Panthers continuing their dominance at home, beating the Cowboys 30-27. This was definitely another upset because the Panthers were home underdogs, and they ended up going up to 3-3 for the season and continuing to impress a lot of people and scoring points. And that whole attack with Bryce Young and Rico Dowdle and Tedero and McMillan, it was looking like it was working, and they were winning some games, and they were 500 through 6 games, which hasn't happened in God knows how long. So just seeing that was pretty freaking sweet, We also had the Chargers struggling to beat the Dolphins, but ultimately ending up beating the Dolphins 29-27 off of a late drive. I remember the highlight of that drive was like a scramble, and Justin Herbert looked dead to rights, and then he ended up finding a Ladd McConkey who broke a tackle and then took it like 60 yards to get into field goal range, and ultimately beating the Dolphins off of a last-second field goal. So that was a pretty awesome game. I was just kind of bummed watching this game because I thought the Dolphins were going to pull it off, but I was just a little too hopeful for that. We also had the Colts continuing their run, beating the Arizona Cardinals 31-27. I believe it was Jacoby Brissett. Yeah, it was Jacoby Brissett playing in this game for the Cardinals, which kind of gave them a little spark. I mean, not a big enough spark for them to win, but sure enough a spark for them to keep it close against the rolling at the time number 1 seed AFC Indianapolis Colts. It kept it close and, had the Colts sweating for a little bit, but the Colts ultimately ended up beating this team 31-27. Also, want to apologize. I feel like I'm saying the word ultimately quite a bit, but, it just seems like it fits every single time that I use it. So I love using that word ultimately. Like, I keep hearing myself say ultimately, and I'm like, wow, like I've been saying that quite a bit, but I'm not going to be insecure about it. I feel like it fits, so I'm just going to ultimately keep using it. We had the Chiefs beating the Lions on Sunday Night Football, which honestly wasn't that great of a game, but just had to mention it because the Chiefs got back to 3-3 and made them formidable opponents yet again. The Chiefs were still the Chiefs all the way up until I want to say maybe week 14 or 15, or once they had lost on Thanksgiving against the Cowboys. That's when it was like, okay, the Chiefs are kind of clowns here, what's going on? This is not the same Chiefs team. They're losing on national television to the Cowboys. Like, what's going on here? So, but just had to mention, the Kansas City Chiefs journey up until this season, or up until this point in the season. Monday Night Football, we had the Bills getting upset by the Falcons, in which Bijan went totally nutso in this game. This also wasn't that great of a game, but the fact that it was an upset against the quote-unquote Super Bowl contending Bills, it was like, okay. And this was the second game that the Bills had lost, or the second game in a row that they had lost, because they had lost previously to the Patriots, and everybody was like, should we panic now? The Bills started out 4-0 and now they're 4-2. They kind of looked like if they had beaten the Eagles, or if they could beat the Eagles and the Chiefs, they'd be undefeated, but now they've lost 2 in a row. Are they okay? And it just kind of foreshadowed all of their problems for the rest of the season. And last but not least, we had the Bears going into Washington and exacting revenge for that Hail Mary off of a game-winning kick in the rain to beat the Commanders 25-24. And I believe that this was the second time that the Bears ended up beating a team 25-24 in the final seconds, which is crazy because I just went over another game in which they beat the Raiders 25-24 on the road as well. So the fact that they ended up beating the Commanders and getting revenge on Jaden Daniels' crazy Hail Mary last year, it was awesome. And it was kind of like a passing of the torch because last year, whoever won that game pretty much, went on a run and then got to either the divisional round or the conference championship. And then this year, the same thing happened. The Bears ended up winning that matchup this time around, and then they ultimately ended up going on a run, and they ended up going to the divisional round in which they lost against the Rams. So that was like some crazy foreshadowing. I want to look up and see if the Bears are playing the Commanders again next year, because that would I have been loving these matchups between Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. You know, if one of them gets hurt, God forbid, before this like matchup that they got going, before this like little rivalry they got going on, it's gonna be a bummer. It's like, just cancel the game. You know, I want to see these two number 1 and number 2 overall picks going up against each other, because both of their games up until this point have been totally 10 out of 10 awesome watches. And I just looked it up, and unfortunately it does not look like the Bears will be playing the Commanders, at least in the regular season this year. So fingers crossed, hopefully that they can make the playoffs. Both teams can make the playoffs. I don't know why I said fingers crossed. I don't ever do that, but like, hopefully that they can both make the playoffs and face each other, because man, that would be must-watch television. Anyways, that has been episode 13 of Bring the Sink. Please follow Bring the Sink on TikTok and Instagram. I believe they're both at Bring the Sink Pod. So that's, again, at Bring the Sink Pod. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm trying to develop more of a social media presence on both platforms. So thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate every single one of you guys. And peace.